Good afternoon and welcome to Bradenton Kiwanis. My name is Neil Unruh. I am not dressed up like a clown today. It's great to see everybody. Welcome all of our guests. We'll introduce you later. At this time, Janine Amick will provide us with our invocation, and then please join me in the pledge and singing of America, or my country 'tis of thee. Or whichever it is. We may sing 3 times.
Please bow with me. God our Father, we thank you for this time together. Lord, in the midst of so much chaos outside of these walls, we ask for strength and guidance. We ask a special blessing over the congressman today. Lord, be with him, shine his steps forward in a path that you have designed for him. We ask, God, that you provide each of us discernment and wisdom as we go out into the workplace, as we volunteer. We ask that our community prosper in the right direction and provide safety for those who feel unsafe. We ask a special blessing over the food, that it may nourish us, that gives us the strength that we need to continue. All of this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen.
I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrims bright, from every mountain side, let freedom ring. All right, everybody, please be seated. We'll be back at around 12:30 for our program. Okay, welcome back, everyone, for the program portion of today. Announcement, the Kids Against Hunger has been delayed, and we will get back with you as soon as that is set. Mike will arrange that. Member activity in 2 weeks. We will be at the Pirates. You can sign up on Portal Buzz. We have a cost of $35. If you already have season tickets or ticket already, $15. If you just bring cash or check to the game, we'll check you in out there. My guess is we'll have a list that we will provide to the Pirates. You'll go to the will call and pick up your tickets from there to get into the stadium and then come out to the Lipinski area for a great time. I'll be embarrassing myself and Bradenton Kiwanis by throwing out the first pitch. So if you want to see embarrassment, please sign up so you can come. It's the price of entertainment these days. Yeah, I will not wear the clown suit. No, we won't do that. Club board meeting tomorrow at noon at Fusilli's, which is just up the road here. So we'll have that at noon tomorrow. All information should have been emailed out to everybody. Rita, please come up and let us know about guests.
Good afternoon, everyone. So our special guest today, when I call your name, please stand so you can receive a warm Kiwanis welcome. Our first guest is Jim Temperton with guest of Buzz Turner.
Welcome.
Our next guest is Kavisia McMore, guest of Manatee Habitat. Rick Morris, guest of John Vita. Mike Jackson and Sally Shelley, guest of Vern Buchanan. And Melissa Wilson, guest of Sharon Barhouse. Thank you all for attending today and welcome.
All right, thank you, Rita. Do we need anything for membership or wait a week on that? Okay, we'll do that. At this time, I'll call up Andy Miner to introduce our program today.
Good morning, everyone. I am so excited to be able to introduce our speaker for you today. Vern Buchanan was first elected in 2006 into the Florida as a congressional member of the U.S. House of Representatives. Over the years, he's been a part of that organization. He's been the most effective member on a bipartisan basis. He currently serves as the vice chair of the House Ways and Means Committee. He's the chairman of the Health Subcommittee and the co-chair of the Florida delegation. Since 2007, 29 of his legislative initiatives has been signed into law. And if you understand how difficult it is to get a law through Congress, he's been able to shepherd it and get it done. So it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend, Vern Buchanan.
Yeah, remember, Andy started on our campaign, but what was so impressive wasn't so much him, but his wife. She did. She was unbelievable. He met his wife there. We had quite a few of our people that we got to meet over the years that met their spouses there in our first campaign or two. But she's run the office now in Sarasota. He's run the office here. They built a huge business together. Congratulations. And he's just been terrific. A lot of people might not know that they say, well, how'd you end up getting in this region? Because I'm originally from Michigan. We had two good friends of ours in the late 70s. I hate to date myself too much, but in the late 70s, that Lou Henderson, that took us down to, they had a place on Anna Maria Island. And we came down one year, came down the second year, and we just fell in love with the whole area. Then we ended up, I told my wife, I said, this is a great place to buy real estate. I read something in the paper, and I'm not exaggerating this, actually. There was, if you bought a condo on Longboat at the time, and my friend's wife worked there and worked for Pat Neal, but if you bought a condo there, I see he's laughing with Pat Neal, but anyway, the point is that they had an article that they said there was 1,000% appreciation on a condo or condos in this building. I said, that's impossible. I've never heard anything like that. So I went and looked at it, and at the Longboat Towers, you could buy in the early 70s a unit for $30,000. 10 years later, it was up to $300,000, 10 times 1,000%. So I told my wife, I said, honey, this is a no-brainer. We need to buy something here, because we were doing pretty good in our businesses at the time in Michigan back then. So in the early 80s, we bought a two-bedroom condo. I think we paid $177. 7, 8 years later, we sold it for $177. so that's my story on that standpoint. But I just want to congratulate, and that's a true story, by the way. I just want to congratulate, the organization. What a history. It's got to be one of the top organizations in the country, what you've contributed. I remember going to a Boys and Girls Club, and they said children make up 25% of the population, but 100% of the future. And so what you guys have invested in, gals, over the years for the youth and the kids, that's just so critical, from that standpoint. What I wanted to do is just run through there's a lot of issues out there today, some more local, some national. So I thought I'd run through them, and then we could open it up for questions and take more of your questions. When I get a call on Sunday night from the Secretary of the Treasury or a reference to a call, I knew that, this was serious, that they were taking it serious, the whole thing on Silicon Valley Bank. And also, I went through the 08 crisis in that period of time, and that was a very brutal crisis. I didn't originally vote for the $800 billion, but a few days later, they convinced me that we needed to do something. By the way, they got all the money back. But this, being on bank boards for quite a few years, because I was someone that was in business, but I enjoyed being on bank boards. And I knew one thing about banks is they're highly leveraged, as most of you know, anybody that's been in banking, at least that's my perception. Got about 10% equity, so if you got $10 million, you can lend out 100 million ideally. So here you got a bank which is finances startups, and that's just high risk to begin with. I didn't even know, I assume there's a bank for everybody, but I didn't even know that was that type of a bank, and one of the larger banks grew it very quickly in the environment, raising interest rates. So, you know, this is something we're going to pay attention to. I feel like we've got a lot more liquidity, equity with a lot of our banks, so I think we're in much better shape, but it's something that we clearly can't take for granted from that standpoint. And the sense is they're going to do whatever they got to do to make sure everybody gets their money, you know, from that standpoint. But now I'll tell you something that I'm just as concerned about, or more concerned, is the overall debt ceiling. That's looming in the background, and it's something that, you know, I'm dealing with. I met with the Secretary of Treasury. We had a hearing, our committee did, on Friday. And I don't like the idea, and everybody has a reason why they go to Congress. My biggest motivation was deficit spending. There's other reasons, but that was at the top of the list. I don't think you should spend more than you take in. I don't care if you're the county, the state. 49 out of 50 governors have that, a balanced budget amendment. My first week in Congress, and every new Congress, I voted for a balanced budget amendment because I simply think, within reason, I don't even care how you spend it. I don't like spending money that we don't have. So now what's happened over the last 20 years? In the last 20 years, we've accumulated, in fact, $4 trillion in the last 2 years, but 20 trillion in the last 20 years. When I got there, it was 8 trillion, now it's 31 trillion. And any way they can find a way to spend money, your money, puts the country at risk. Because when you have an incident like Silicon Bank or something else, and then you've got all this lurking where you're questioning whether you can pay your own bills, that's not a good scenario. So, you know, we're trying to do, and I told the Secretary the other day, they have all these things we're going to balance in 10 years. I said, that's a lot of bull. I said, I've watched it for 20 years. You talk a good game, but nobody ever shows up. But again, 20 trillion in 20 years, and it's not just, you know, the Democrats. It's both parties. And the only way we're going to resolve this is do something on either a third party outside of experts, or working with a bipartisan group that makes sense to deal with this. So that's really a big part of what needs to be done, and I'm pushing for that. A lot of people don't want to touch it, simply because they think the idea of the government's just unlimited amount of money. But my feeling is it's just not a matter of if, it's a matter of when it ends badly. And you just can't have that kind of debt and deficit out there. So what is Biden comes out with his budget? His budget, he's talking about raising taxes, $3 trillion. But the concern I have is, I started out as a blue-collar kid and my wife and I started our business, a small business, and built it up over the years, and we've been blessed. But the bottom line is, what they're talking about, of the $3 trillion he wants to raise in new taxes, $1 trillion, which you don't read about that much, or you really got to better understand it, is with small business, 50 employees or less. That's where $1 trillion of the dollars, for the most part, are going. Not all of it, but a lot of it. Pass-through entities, in terms of LLCs or subchapter S's, that flows through to you personally. So let's say you got 100 employees, and you happen to make 800, you don't take out the 800. You got taxes you got to pay. You may take out 150 or take a number, and then you try to save, you know, 200 or 300 for money that you can grow. But if you're going to take that much money, so they're looking to raise taxes up to, when you add it all up, close to 43%, 44% federally. And then if you take a look at New York, New Jersey, California, they've got another 13 to 15%. So you're looking at almost 60%. That's why they're all coming to Florida, because and you see that all the time. Everybody up and down the street, live here 6 months in a day. So, the whole thing on taxes does not make us competitive, especially at a time like this. We want to keep our taxes low, especially for small business. Now, someone would say, Vern, you're always out for the small business guy and everything. Why so much? I said, because they're the job creators. They're the ones that provide majority of the jobs. They make up most of the business entities in the country. 95% are these pass-through entities or small businesses. So whatever I can do to help them be more successful, and that's why what we did on the tax cuts we put in place, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, 4 or 5 years ago, they went to corporate rates, which is, from 35 to 21, a 40% cut. But on pass-throughs, they didn't know how to deal with them. So I really led that effort in that, and we ended up with a 199A, we call it 199A. So we went from 39.5 at the time down to 37.5, and that 20% reduction for 199A is a provision in the code that will cut that tax, get it down closer to 21. Then we went to this idea of full expensing. So if you buy a piece of equipment, new or used, you can write it off the first year. So it's a timing issue instead of over 5 years. So if someone's got a farm or something and they buy a used tractor and you spend $400,000, instead of writing it off historically over 5 years, you can write it off over 1 year. And that makes, in my mind, a huge difference. So the combination of the two, we got closer, but I think there should be parity. Why should corporations that make $1 zillion not get the same, why should their rates be a lot lower than small business and pass-through entities? So that's something I continue to work on. I have the bill, because if we don't pass the bill I've got is to make the tax cuts permanent, which a lot of them will sunset. Some of them are starting to sunset now in 25. Then you're going to end up with 23 of the provisions, taxes going up for individuals and small businesses. The other thing is just to run through a couple of things. Some of you might have heard or read about the train derailment. I was very concerned. There's about 1,000 derailments, but this happened here in Manatee County. And you had 5 or 6 cars. 2 of them were carrying liquid propane, hazardous. It could blow up a lot of things. And then 5 of them were the rail cars were carrying drywall. Drywall is okay. But then you start looking down, you start looking down the rails, as I was looking at all the rails, and they're like this. I said, how old are those tracks? And we're right down the street here. I'm looking at them. The cars are rolled over. So how old are those tracks? He said, 100 years. I said, you haven't done anything or done much in 100 years? I said, what's the life of the rack? He said, probably pretty close to 100. So obviously, and that's a true story. So it's something that I was on the Transportation Committee overseeing rail and aviation. So it's something we're clearly going to take a look at. But my sense of it is a lot of these railroads don't make any money. They make some, but not much. We usually have to bail a lot of them out. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be here today. So it's something that, we're going to work at. Our office is going to be looking at very, very carefully. We can't take that risk because the risk of something imploding, like what happened up in Ohio, is unbelievable. And unfortunately, a lot of these tracks run through communities that they're already challenged communities, but now you add a whole other challenge with that. The other thing is, in terms of one of my top priorities has been and always will be, I grew up in, as I mentioned, to the Detroit area, Michigan, and we had Lake Erie. And it was so polluted as a kid, you couldn't swim in it. You couldn't, if you caught a fish, you couldn't eat it. And, so they've cleaned it up. I hear it's a little worse back, but they did clean it back up. But my point is, red tide has to be, I know it's something, it's a natural recurrence, but we want to do a lot more in this space. I think we've got something at the beach house. I'm going to bring a lot of experts in this Friday, and we're going to talk about, what more we can do. We have, I've got them $8 million for research, another $100 million I supported when we got, but we need to find a way to minimize it. But one of the thoughts, there's a lot of, talk to 10 people, experts, they'll give you 10 different answers. But one of the things that is the reality, and a lot of people don't think about it, but Florida in 1970 was 7 million. Today we're at 23 million people. This district that I'm in, and it's a true story, the district I'm in, out of 27 districts, in the last 10 years, they do the census, we were the 2nd fastest growing. In the country, we're the 8th fastest growing. So one area is the whole population. Probably the storms aggravated a lot of things. But the intensity of the red tide, I love the water. I love beach. I love swimming in the water, the Gulf of Mexico, I love fishing, all that. But the bottom line is we've got to make sure we make this, if not the highest priority, one of the highest priorities. I mean, national security obviously is the highest priority, but this has to be dealt with the best we can. And there's a lot of factors like that pours in. You got a lot of septic things. You got the ag community. You got the sugar industry. You got a lot of different aspects of it. We got storms. So I think this is clearly an area that we've got to stay focused on. And I'm very, very committed for Lake Erie and others. The legacy, I've got 9 grandkids and 2 sons. So, and your kids and grandkids, we've got to do everything we can, because someone said, well, Vern, hell, I'm 3 miles off the beach. Well, it affects everybody. If you have friends, anybody over, I just get those calls that say, I'm not on the beach, I'm in Venice, I'm back here. But the bottom line, it affects everybody. And if nothing else, it affects, I tell some of my friends, your real estate values and everything else. So this is something we've got to take serious. The other thing is I co-chair the Animal Protection Caucus in the country, and the fact that we have 2,000 manatees that have died in the last 2 years is unbelievable. And that's a record amount. And so that's another reason we have to deal with it. A lot of it is, because of that as well. 2 other things is you mentioned the vice chairs of Ways and Means. We're the tax writing committee, but we're also the committee that oversees Medicare and Social Security. I just became chairman of health, first time in Florida we've ever had a chairman of health. And our budgets, when you add it all up, $800 billion, something like that. But Medicare and Social Security are 2 programs that are on the edge. Not so much Social Security, but Medicare in 4 or 5 years they're talking about would be insolvent. I mean, you'll get paid something, but it won't be what you're getting now. And then, of course, Social Security's out 8 years, and you say, well, how's that happening? Well, you've got a lot of people that used to pay into it for a few at the top. Now it's gone the other way. And a lot of the biggest group that's living longer are in their 80s and 90s. And a lot of times, a lot of these programs were put in place in the 30s and the 60s. And, you get to be, especially a male, you retire at 63, and then all of a sudden, you're not around long enough to even collect the benefits in some cases. But my point is, this is something that is one of my top priorities, is make sure these programs work long term. However, they're very political, because anybody touch or say anything potentially about trying to reform some of the programs so they're more viable long term, even though you might not cut much or something, it's a good way to lose your job quickly. So we don't have. That's why we have to make it bipartisan, or we've got to have a third-party group that can take a look at this and make some suggestions. They're afraid to deal with it, but we've got to deal with it if we want to make it work long-term. In the Reagan year, they made some tweaks to Social Security, and it made a huge difference, from that standpoint. So that's one of the things that, I'm focused on, our committee's focused on, and we need to do the other thing. I did an event the other day here in the county with the sheriff and the police department. Had a good discussion for probably an hour about various things. So I said, if you can distill it down, what is your biggest issue? How can we help you from a federal standpoint or just in general? And they both said kind of the same thing. Affordable housing. Affordable housing. You can't get young people, married people, 25 years old, can't afford a house. Rent in this area in the county went up 44%. And then just for rent, but buying a home went up 38%. I went to a groundbreaking on a facility not far from here in Manatee County, 100 units, 97 units or 90 units. We're just kind of celebrating that. I was asking them, I said, how long do you think it'll take? Because it's, there's some benefit the way they structure it, makes it more affordable for people that qualify. And I said, well, how long do you think it'll take you to get it done? He says, well, we put it on the market on Friday, and we were talking on Monday. He said 2 or 3 days. He said we got over 1,000 inquiries. And you're probably saying, well, that's probably the case. But that is the biggest issue. That's one of the things we want to see what we can do with it. Is there's some incentives, some areas where we can make affordable housing. We've got to be more creative because if you're someone making, especially with the inflation, and you're making, $45,000 as a new police officer, and you take home 30, how are you going to afford a house or a payment on a house? So that's one of the areas that we need to take a look at as well. A lot of you know, probably, my story. There's a lot of stories in here, which they've done, but I'm fighting for the American dream. The money, whatever they pay me, I give to charity, frankly. I'm building a children's, my wife's in charge of that, but a children's facility to make a difference there. But, I grew up as a blue-collar kid. My wife grew up as a blue-collar kid. We started a little business, Speedy Printing, 1976. Went from 2 stores to 800. Didn't have any money, put $1,500 in, and sold it to Merrill Lynch, actually. And then we moved to Florida in 1990, full-time, and got in the car business and did a roll-up and ended up with a couple of car dealerships. And I didn't know if I like it. I like cars, but growing up in Detroit, but I didn't know if I like it. And we built that into almost $1 billion enterprise. I only tell you that humbly because that's the America I believe in. That if you get out of life what you expect, I tell my kids, be very careful who you hang around with. But, America's a special place. Yeah, we've got these challenges, but I've been to 80 countries, and we're the best place on the planet. Thank you, and God bless. I want to grab my water. If you got any tough questions, I'm going to give them to Andy. Yes, ma'am.
I'm with Habitat for Humanity, so
Huh?
I'm interested to hear what you had to say on the housing issue, because as you know, there's a humongous difference between affordable housing and affordable home ownership, which is considerably better for all. I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on not just the federal government's role in the issues that have happened in this area, particularly where housing went up, both buying and renting so much. Who takes care of that, in your opinion? Is it the local community? Is it the business?
I think we all have a responsibility to figure out what we can do. I'm going to look at it from a federal standpoint, and I'll tell you exactly what you were saying. It's nice. A lot of people start out in an apartment initially, but an apartment's very expensive because when you look at not just the price, but you can't deduct the interest. So if you buy a house, at least you get that payment, you get to deduct maybe 25% of it in terms of a tax benefit. So I'm very, very big on people getting when they can, as soon as they can, in home ownership, because ideally you build some equity and stuff over a period of time. And in this area, they're going to keep coming. And what drives, why is the prices up like they are here? Because this is probably one of the most desirable places in the country, and people have really discovered Manatee County. And so I'm a big fan of trying to get people in affordable housing. Yeah, there's things they can do at the county level, probably the city level, the state level, especially in the county. They can give them more density credits, and there's different things that they can do. We all need to be working on ways to help young people or people in general. But I'm just thinking about the young people that are trying to start out in life. You might have an apartment for a year, but I've talked to a lot of them. As soon as they can get in a house and get the payments where it makes some sense. Now, when interest rates were 3.5%, it's a big difference than, now they're at 6.5%. So in some ways, if you think about it, you get a half a house. I hate to say it that way, but that's the truth. And now for the older group here, me, my wife and all that, in the early 80s, interest rates used to be as high as 20%. We were 12, 13% for a mortgage. So I'd get like a quarter of a house. But there's a lot of truth to that. Now, so we want to do everything we can. And the other thought is, I just don't know how they can continue to raise rates. I didn't even think they'd raise them up this much, because when you got $31 trillion in debt and you raise the rates 100 basis points, 1%, you're talking about $300 billion of additional taxpayer money. So, but I guess they feel like they'd rather spend it that way than, the other way. So I just don't agree with it. So it's interesting to see what the feds are going to do with rates next week or next couple of weeks or something like that. So, but I'm all for affordable housing. There's more we can all do, and I know I'm looking at it from a tax standpoint, what we could do to help young families get in their first house. Yeah. Doc?
I have a daughter and son-in-law working, living in DC area. Could you address the crime issue escalation in DC?
A lot of it is, leadership. And, I don't know the mayor there, but I've heard enough about her. And a lot of these communities in and around the country, they're much more liberal on how they deal with it. And we got, a lot of people don't really realize, but we've got a million police sworn and sheriffs in the country. Without them, you have nothing. And so it depends a lot on what community you're in. There's a lot of it's safe in DC, so I'm not saying but there's like a lot of communities, you don't want to be in some of the communities. But I think overall, they're pretty good now. One thing is DC proper, the city of, and then a lot of people live in Maryland and Virginia. But there's a lot of safe places. You just got to be, careful, I think, anywhere you go today to some extent.
I understand in the Biden tax package, there's the idea of taxing capital gains, or unrealized capital gains. What are your thoughts on that, and do you think it'll make it through to the end?
One of the good things is that, we're not in control, but we do control the House. So it's going to be very hard for them to pass anything tax-wise. I don't see it. We'd never pass anything out of the House that's going to raise taxes. Rich might not like this, but my general feeling, I think the maximum tax rate, it makes sense, should be 20% and not 40%, what they're proposing, 44%. I think it's insane. And I can live with that in terms of capital gains too, especially when you look at what we owe in the deficit spending. Now, would I like it at 15%? I saw a lot of things, back in '06 at 15%. Yeah, I like 15%, but I think 20% makes some sense. So that would be my thing. Nobody pays over 20. You keep it simple. You don't need all the tax attorneys and the special CPAs. You pay your fair share. Now, I'm talking about people that make over 400 or something. If you make, 50 and under, maybe it's 5%. And then, or maybe, 50 to 100, maybe it's 10%. But try to keep it simple, the tax codes. That's what we were trying to do, not have 10 brackets, but maybe have 4 or 5 and have a sheet of paper you can send your tax return in on. But that's my thinking, is that I think that's pretty fair, someone that's been in business a long time. Now, again, I'm not talking about businesses that make under that, but at a point where you're making some money. But I don't believe in taking 30, 40%. If there's companies that do have more employees in this county and others, and you end up taking almost half of their money or a third of their money, that makes no sense, because that's the earnings that you have is the fuel to grow your business. We don't have access as much to the capital markets that a lot of the big companies do. Yes, sir.
What do you see for future transportation dollars coming to this fast-growing area?
Well, as you know, the money goes to Tallahassee and then goes down here, and that's where we got to work with our state reps, and we've got a lot of good ones here. But we need the dollars to come here with roads and bridges, and there's times where, candidly, I had money coming here and pushing for money here, and they said, no, we don't want to do that. And, so a lot of it depends on what the community wants. And, when you say, well, Vern, what are you talking about? Like the bridges over to Anna Maria Island, the money was earmarked there, my understanding. It goes down to Sarasota, but the money was earmarked there originally, and they decided it didn't make sense for them, or didn't want to do it. And so I think we're going to have a lot of dollars coming here. We just got to fight to get our fair share, and that's part of my job and the state reps. And then it's for the county commission, the city commission to figure out, where they want to best spend it. I just help get the money, and then if it makes sense, but if they're not going to spend it, then just leave it in the treasury. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming today.
Yeah.
Appreciate your visit. You made a couple of little sayings to liberals, which is, of course, you're right, if it was a Democrat up there, they'd make up a couple of zings to Republicans. What I want to know is, when are all the elected officials in Washington going to start working both sides on what is good for the American people through collaboration? Because right now, it is so political that nothing is getting done for the American people.
Yeah.
So what are you gonna do to help start that?
Well, I think a lot of people say things, and maybe I give a few zingers. I'm probably the most bipartisan guy in Washington. You can go check my record. That's why I got 29 bills done. You can't get bills done unless you work with the other side. It's different. Well, no, I'm just trying to give you the thing. In Tallahassee, it's different. One party controls everything. In Washington, basically, as long as I've been there, if you want to get anything done, you got to work with the other side. I'm the go-to guy. Now, I'm not going to cave on principled things, but I'm always thinking about, I tell all the Democrats the same thing. Hey, we're all Americans. Let's find a way to get to yes that makes some sense for both sides. And that's the mindset I bring to it. And I bet I'm in the top 5 or 10 that have got 30 bills signed into law. And, you know, everything you can imagine, you know, from that standpoint. But so that's the mindset I bring to it. I don't like, and I did say, 20 trillion, Democrats and Republicans. I don't like what's happened. And Trump did spend a lot of money too, don't get me wrong. But I don't, just to keep that intensity up and give us a new budget with all the debt and deficit we had, that's going to add another 3 trillion in taxes and everything else. I'm not, I'm against it in a very aggressive way, that way. Yeah. Anyway, thank you. God bless. I'll be around for a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, Congressman Buchanan, for coming today. As our tradition, we have a golden Kiwanis ruler to measure your future success and getting that budget passed.
Yeah, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick. Right here, that's good. Thank you. All right, thank you so much. Next week, we have the Boys and Girls Club, and then the following week, we have our Day at the Pirates. Be sure to sign up on Portal Buzz for that. And the following week, we have another congressman coming, so we have a lot of great programs. Thank you so much for coming. You're dismissed.